Our goal should be to redeem people through the grace of God and Jesus Christ. Even those that the world has slammed in prison, the world has forgotten and said, you're a convicted felon, you'll never come out. I believe God has a redemptive person for even the people the world has rejected. God has sent His Son to the world not to condemn the world, but that through Him the world might be saved. Welcome to the Leadership Podcast of Christ Church. We are a leadership podcast that's it's rooted in the Wesleyan tradition. And we believe that everything rises and falls on leadership. Some have asked, why do you say it's in the Wesleyan tradition? I believe John Wesley was probably one of the top 5 or 10 greatest leaders in the world. John Maxwell sees it that way. You largely test a leader's credibility and impact based upon what's going on 100 or 200 or even 300 years after they've passed away. John Wesley still studied, his journals are still read, his sermons are still referred to, and the people called Methodist and the Wesleyan faith number some scholars say as many as 500 million people worldwide or more, because it comes from the Assembly of God, the Church of God, Nazarenes, and other Methodist denominations, and their kindreds, sisters and brothers throughout the world. And today we're looking at something that's very important to leadership. I just attended a few weeks ago the base camp, as we call it, for the Global Leadership Summit, which we host every August. We're hosting it August the 7th through the 8th again. And would love for you to attend that, whether it's at Christ Church, which we're one of their satellites, or another church or another venue that's close to you. What's wonderful about that is you don't have to fly to Chicago and get a hotel room and a rental car. You can be a part of the summit. It's broadcast live. Then you can go back home and sleep in your own bed and come back the next day. So it's a wonderful opportunity for leading. And I firmly believe it's one of the greatest leadership programs or events literally in the world. That's another thing I love about it, is it's literally around the world. There'll be some 220 to 250,000 people that will view the Leadership Summit sometime between August, when it actually happens, and by the fall of 2025 in many different countries and many different languages around the world. Today, who I had a chance to hear back in February, is Jenni Catron, and she has, of course, the book Culture Matters. She gave a talk there on the platform, and as I thought about how culture matters, I thought about our one-year Bible reading just a few days ago and how culture went sideways. It was going sideways. Here's the kicker. It was going sideways right in front of the main leader. Now, not to throw Moses under the bus, so let me begin with this. Maybe, just maybe, because I still think Moses is one of the greatest leaders who ever lived, but maybe, just maybe, he was seeing something with his eyes, and he was so shocked by it, he may have been frozen for just a moment. Or it might have been, like some of us leaders some of the time, he really didn't know what to do at that moment. I hope to heaven he wasn't in denial, but it's possible. There are times when we are in denial about our culture, and that our culture's gone sideways. And it can go sideways for many, many reasons. And that's what we're going to talk about, because here at Christ Church, we're going to be undergoing over the next several months and over the next year a cultural awareness that will lead to a culture rebuilding. We're going to be focusing on a cultural awareness, like, hey, where are we as a culture? We have a vision statement. We have a mission statement. Is that just on paper? Or are we actually living it out? We have core values. Is that something that we really base our decisions on when we're talking about new initiatives or other things? And we say we're going to focus on the mission of Christ Church and we're going to implement the core values. However, are we focusing on so many things that we have a culture drift? So I think it's fair to say, let's have a cultural awareness time. Just digging down, listening to each other, looking at these priorities, and then assessing, are we in a cultural drift? Or is there anything we can do to rebuild the culture or enhance it? So that's an honest confession up front. So in other words, I'm living through some of this book and some of this thesis. But let's go to the text, because we always want to be grounded, at least on this podcast, to see how's God speaking to us and how's God spoke to other persons in the past, especially on particular issues. And I believe that the people of Israel were in a cultural drift at this moment compared to where God wanted them to be. So the Lord issued the following command to Moses: seize all the ringleaders and execute them before the Lord in broad daylight, so his fierce anger will turn away from the people of Israel. So Moses ordered Israel's judges, each of you must put to death the men under your authority who have joined in the worshiping Baal of Peor. Just then, at that moment, an Israelite men, one of them brought a midnight woman into his tent, right before the eyes of Moses and all the people, as everyone was weeping at the entrance of the tabernacle. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and the grandson of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he jumped up, and he left the assembly. He took a spear, and he rushed after the man into his tent. Phinehas thrust the spear all the way through the man's body and into the woman's stomach. So the plague against the Israelites was stopped, but not before 24,000 people had died. Then the Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and the grandson of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites by being as zealous among them as I was. So I stopped destroying all of Israel as I had intended to do in my zealous anger. Now tell him that I am making my special covenant of peace with him, and in this covenant I will give him and his descendants a permanent right to the priesthood. For in his zeal for me, his God, he purified the people of Israel, making them right with me. A few things I want to say, of course, about this passage. Thank heavens that we don't believe that in any way, shape, or form I'm suggesting in this podcast of you or any others that if you see a fellow coworker, fellow employee, or what are out of line, that you go grab a spear and do anything with it that you should not. But there are some incredible principles that come out of this passage that we really need to learn from, and that is simply this. Was Moses aware of what was going on? I mean, it was right in front of his eyes, but can things happen right in front of our eyes and we miss it? I mean, that's just a question to ask. And then the other thing is, what do you do when you unequivocally, without debate, see missional drift? I mean, we're supposed to worship, Hear, O Israel. You shall worship the Lord your God, and only him shall you serve. And yet they were engaging in the worshiping of other gods and the god of Baal. Totally unacceptable. So then we have to ask ourselves the question, if culture matters, what's acceptable in our culture and what's totally unacceptable? What's absolutely out of bounds? Sorry, guys, we can't do that. What's acceptable? What's absolutely unacceptable? And then I think it's important to realize that there are systems of what I call healthy accountability. I believe with all my heart, and I've tried to live this out, in 41 years, time flies, doesn't it? 43 years of ministry. I started when I was 19 years old as a student pastor. And when I had students that were absolutely challenging, rebellious, self-destructive, when I had students that went out of their way to just see what I would do with them. And I had this on retreats at Lake Junaluska. I had this on retreats when I did them in South Georgia at St. Simon's Island, when I was at a youth retreat in the Gulf Coast of Florida. And you had to make a decision. Are you going to, you're going to send this student home because this student's absolutely rebellious and doesn't want to do things as a team. God put in my heart 43 years ago that as best as I can, I should practice redemption and redemptive work and redemptive correction as best as I can. Now, sometimes there are absolutes in that. But the whole reason for it is for redemption. And in this case, I think God wanted to bring that about, but there were certain situations where God said, hey, enough is enough. And here, there's still redemption in mind, even in the midst of all of this, because God rewards persons who are willing to abide by his greater mission. And so that's why he says to Phinehas, not trying to throw Moses under the bus, but Phinehas, you get it. And I am going to, because you get it, I'm going to put you in a position of leadership. Now, he did not put Phinehas over Moses. We need to be clear about that. But he was the grandson of Aaron, of course, and he put him in a position of prominent leadership among the priests. So God saw that, recognized it, and rewarded it. And so with that backdrop, let's go into some of Jenni's teaching and what we can learn from that, especially as it is supported by, I think, some of the principles in the text that we've looked at. Jenni speaks in her book and in her presentation with us about the building blocks for organizational success. The building blocks of organizational success. She starts with number one being purpose. Purpose. Obviously, why does your business, why does your nonprofit, why does your organization exist? What's your purpose? People identify with a cause. They identify with a purpose. And so she says in her book, without a keen sense of purpose, you will get crushed under the weight of responsibility as you scale up. Without a keen sense of purpose, you will be crushed under the weight of responsibility as you scale up. If you know what your purpose is, you know what your mission is, and you keep sharing that, you keep speaking that, it helps you to be able to move forward, and it helps you to move forward as you are called to your purpose. So this is also the why behind everything. Your purpose, your mission is your why behind everything. Our vision and mission, what is that? At Christ Church, our vision is we will do whatever it takes short of sin to reach lost people for Jesus Christ. And we believe that's our vision because we believe Jesus said, I have come to seek and to save that which is lost. We believe that when Jesus spoke to Nicodemus in the middle of the night, he probably felt like he had limited time. Nicodemus wanted to know, what are you about, Jesus? What are you all about? You're a man sent from God. You couldn't do the things that you do unless you were from God. So I want to know. I mean, Nicodemus was a very learned teacher of Israel and may have been the teacher, may have been the scholar at the time. The Greek articles, when Jesus says, are you not the teacher of Israel? That Greek article says the, not a, but the teacher of Israel. So are you the teacher of Israel and don't know? And I think Nicodemus was trying to say, hey, what's your purpose? Why are you here? What are you all about? And that's when Jesus said, you must be born again. And he was like, what? I mean, you're talking about probably a very analytical guy, deep thinker. How can I go back to my mother's womb a second time? I don't understand. How can you be born again? Jesus said, Nicodemus, here's my purpose. Here's why I'm here. You see, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Nicodemus, God sent his son to the world not to condemn the world. See, that's why I believe in redemptive action in every situation as much as possible. Our goal should be to redeem people through the grace of God and Jesus Christ. Even those that the world has slammed in prison, the world has forgotten and said, you're a convicted felon, you'll never come out. I believe God has a redemptive person for even the people the world has rejected. God has sent his Son to the world not to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. So I believe Jesus kind of unleashed on Nicodemus, here's my purpose. And because of that, this is our vision at Christ Church. To do whatever it takes. And sometimes that means having to come up against inconvenience. It means going the second mile. Our mission at Christ Church is to reach millions of unchurched persons by developing fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. The question is, are people getting that, not just at the top, but as you go down layer after layer after layer after layer, you have mission drift, which causes culture drift. Nobody intends it. Nobody intends it. And if you're a leader and you're upset at the people who are down the rung of leadership for not getting the culture drift, let me reassure you, that's not the fault of your lower level managers. That's your fault and that's my fault. My primary responsibility as the lead pastor of Christ Church, my top 5%, is to continue lifting up the culture of Christ Church and continue to see that we get the culture right. And if there's cultural drift, it's my responsibility. I also cannot hand that off to anybody else. I'm fully in partnership with everybody else, but I can't just surrender that job description and say, okay, 2 or 3 layers down of leadership, you're in charge of culture. No, I've got to eat, sleep, and breathe culture. If they can't see it in me, how's it going to transfer to others? If they can't see it then in my directional leaders, how's it going to transfer to others? If they can't see it in our leaders of various ministries, how then are the other staff going to see it? And then if the laity, the worshipers, can't see it in the staff, it's going to be a mission drift all over. So it's my responsibility. If I'm upset, I got to be upset at me, nobody else. Now, the good thing is there's the hope in this situation. She says, when you have new staff members, they bring new ideas, which is good, by the way. We want new ideas. However, opportunities then emerge that sound like a good idea, and before you realize it, you lack clarity of purpose. If your culture is not healthy, your strategy is irrelevant. In other words, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Come on, somebody. Culture is not healthy, then your strategy is irrelevant, and culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your culture is not healthy, it doesn't matter what your strategy is going to be. When churches and leaders have come to see me in the past and they say, we're thinking about starting a new campus from our church, and I said, that's great. That's great. First question I need to ask you is your why. Why are you doing this? Are you starting a new worship service because your younger people are upset because you don't have contemporary music? Which, it's a legitimate concern. A lot of other churches are doing it. Are you starting a new campus because you think it's the new fad and you think by maybe growing another campus, you'll become successful as a pastor and your church will be successful? What's your why? Why are you doing this? Do you really have a heart to reach unchurched people? Do you really have a heart to reach those who've yet to belong? Is that why you're doing this? The other very critical question I have to ask you is this. Is your culture currently at least semi-healthy? Because if your culture is not semi-healthy, if your culture is somewhat toxic, then you'll be multiplying toxicity. Do you really want to do that? If your culture is semi-healthy, well, how would you define semi-healthy? That's a good question. One is, do you have a unified mission that you're all drawn to? Secondly, do you call each other out lovingly and politely if that mission goes drift? Thirdly, this is really, really important, is do you have a can-do attitude? Do you have a can-do attitude? Because you're going to have to work yourself silly when you're launching a new campus and continue quality ministry that you've been doing while you're launching. And if you would like anything like us and what we've been over the years, We just don't hire a lot of times a whole nother staff to do this and that, because what you're doing is you're trying to multiply culture. And if you multiply culture, you need people in your culture who are going out to multiply your culture. And you just can't have new hires to do all that. New hires are good, but if new hires come in with a DNA from someplace else, and we went through this once, we had a wonderful leader that came in who was a great leader and helped us in leadership. But this leader was A positive blood type, and we were O negative. And he brought A positive DNA with him about how Christ Church should be run, yet we're O negative blood type. I'm just using a physiological metaphor. I hope you follow me in that. It's not a good idea if you're O negative to get a transfusion from somebody who's A positive. Okay, are we tracking? Is that understandable? Sometimes cultures that are healthy here are not good if you take that culture and implement it here when this culture. Now, if this culture is totally dysfunctional and totally toxic, maybe it needs the transfusion. But if this culture's healthy and this culture's semi-healthy, you got to be careful about just instrumentally putting in new ideas or whatever that then causes this culture to go drift. And so it's very important that we understand that. So we focus, she said that, she goes on to say, we focus our efforts on strategic plans and audacious goals and implementing the systems and structures to support them. This was so helpful. The busyness of these efforts often causes us to neglect the development of our teams and creating environments in which the very people we need to accomplish our vision can thrive. So often when you're starting new initiatives that seem like great ideas, but they're not necessarily in keeping with your culture and your greater mission, and you're just doing things to appease people. Craig Rochelle flat out said, hey, when we started New Life Church, here it is. We're going to have outstanding worship. We are going to function in discipleship under life groups and advocating personal study and prayer and Bible study. We are also going to have incredible ministries of outreach where we want to try to create environments that will hopefully be winsome for people when they come in. Environments not just for worship, but children's ministry and other environments. He said that one of the things that they want to do is have incredible children's ministry, so that when students come on Sunday morning, there's an encounter with God. And then they want to have, of course, student ministry where students can come to know Christ and reach them. So they focused on 5 things. And they said, we don't do anything else. You want a men's ministry? That's fine. Do men's ministry. But we're not going to do it. You want a women's ministry? That's fine. Join a life group. Join a women's group. But we're not doing women's ministry. I mean, they were absolutely crystal clear on what their DNA is, their culture is, and what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And he said, we're just going to do simple church. And you may push back against that. You may argue against that, and that's fine. But it's kind of cool. They have over 100,000 people in worship every weekend in 14 different states. So by them focusing on what they believe their culture needs to be, they've been able to successfully reach a lot of unchurched people and accomplish their greater purpose and their greater goal. You may disagree with their purpose and goal and how they get there, and I'm not saying your culture cannot have health if you have women's and children's ministry. I'm just saying you've got to know what your culture is, and then you've got to say, this is who we are and this is what we do. But I do know this. You cannot possibly do everything and be successful at anything. You do have to draw the line sometimes on what you are going to do and what you will not do, because it is exasperating. And you will wear out your staff, you will wear out your laity and your volunteers and everything else if you don't have clarity of focus. And she talks more about that. So number 2, with the culture, the foundation for building culture are your core values. She believes that's important. And she was on a John Maxwell podcast not long ago, and they were talking, the 2 VPs of John's company of leadership about how core values, for whatever reason, is starting to wane in a lot of corporations and even a lot of nonprofits and churches. There's not the emphasis on it that there used to be. In other words, it's just words on a wall. And John Maxwell, they quoted in saying, John is very weary right now, that we're suffering from a lack of values. A lack of values in businesses and a lack of values even in nonprofits and churches. And it hurts him. He hurts for that. That we have justified certain actions and certain business plans and models, and we have forgotten integrity, honesty, loyalty, core values that every person really needs to have. And listen, if folks can't trust you, why are they going to do business with you? And if you produce a product that doesn't last, if you produce a service that doesn't meet the needs of your customer, why should they do business with you? So John just argues that core values are absolutely essential if you're going to win at whatever you're trying to do, whether it's a nonprofit, you're trying to serve people or whatever. So the core values must be lived out, shared, and spoken of in meetings and in sessions. They should be lifted up when deciding things with others. This is vital. This is vital that it takes place. Culture can get lost in busyness. We can just be so busy that we forget who we are. We're doing things. You know, if you ask the average staff person in a culture that's gone sideways, you know, are you working? Yeah, I'm working. In fact, I'm working a lot. But are you working towards the greater purpose? Are you working towards the greater mission? Is there anything you need to say no to so you can say yes to the greater purpose and mission? So we all can get so involved in busyness that we start to have a culture drift. Culture can go sideways as organization grows and people are more removed from the leader and the senior leaders. You have to remove the idea of cult, that culture is cult. Culture is not cult. Culture has to be taught. It has to be taught. Culture cannot just be caught. In the early days of Christ Church, there were 3, 4, 5 of us in the storefront planning worship. We eventually had the children's pastor involved in that, student pastor involved in that. Sometimes we get so excited about planning metaphors and possible video clips and everything else that we would forget to go pick up our kids. We're like, no, we got to go. Bye, everybody. So we'd have to run and go pick up our kids, and they were getting off the school bus. And but there was this sense in which we all were huge. We all had huge buy-in to the culture. We realized why we were there and what we were trying to do, and because we were all in close proximity. And there was just no doubt, and the culture was thriving. And it wasn't perfect, but it was semi-healthy. And then we added more staff, and we kept growing, and then we added more staff, and we kept growing. And what happens is, if we're not clear about teaching our culture can eventually wane, or it can go sideways. Now, strategy. How do we rebuild culture if it's been drifting? How do we reclaim culture if it's still there, but it's not as strong as it could be or should be? What's the strategy to do that? We're going to talk about that on our next podcast. Thank you for joining us.